Let's be honest, you've probably only ever used the F3 menu in Minecraft for two things, flexing your new graphics card or checking your coordinates. But we've all probably wondered, why is there so much other stuff in this menu that nobody seems to talk about? Well, rather than explain the significance of every single item in the menu, I'm going to tell you about the most interesting and useful information that's buried in all of this text. To make everything simpler, this video is going to be split into three sections. The first section covers things that you can easily find in just the baseline debug menu. By the way, debug menu is the official name of the F3 menu. The second section will talk about functions available by pressing other keys along with the F3 key, like F3 plus G or Alt plus F3. And the final section will cover some fun facts and some removed features from the menu. So let's get started. The features that inspired this video were the CH and SH lines. I'll be focusing on the SH line because it has more information, but the difference between CH and SH is beyond the scope of this video. Let me use some relatable analogy for this one. We've all been mining deep underground at one point when we realize our pickaxe is about to break. This is the point in the mining trip where we start digging up to the surface. But I guarantee we've all dug up right into the middle of a mountain before and had our pickaxe break right before we reach the surface. Something to take note of before mining up is this first number because it tells you what the highest level block above your head is that isn't air. Try and mine up next time when the counter is smaller so you don't have to mine right into a mountain. Let's get into the little sub-menus here. The S is for simply the highest block. The O is for the highest blocking motion material. It's quite unknown that Minecraft has a material system that more or less tells you what a given block is made of. To make it simple, a blocking motion material is a block that a player can't just walk through, like wood. The M includes that and also liquids. And the ML includes blocking motion materials but excludes leaves. If you don't want to get tricked by something like an oddly placed tree when digging up, maybe use this number. If you've played in your world over a bunch of versions of Minecraft, you may have seen this little blending indicator in your F3 menu. If you've been upgrading your world throughout a lot of versions, the spawn area of your world is basically all old chunks. Crossing the border from new to old adds this line to the F3 menu. When you're in old terrain, it shows that, allowing you to tell them apart when the blending is too subtle. One of the most underrated features in the F3 menu is the chunk indicator. This shows you what block in a chunk you're located at. Buried treasure is annoyingly difficult to dig up because it can take quite a lot of digging to find, but if you stand right on top of the red X on the map, you can open up your F3 menu and head to the 99 chunk coordinate to immediately find the buried treasure. Cool little party trick to keep in mind. Another hack is that when you're struggling to find the entrance to a stronghold, you can just go to the chunk that the eye goes down into and dig at 4-4. This drops you right into the center of the staircase and is a common speedrunning strategy to save time. Hey, so while I was testing this, I noticed that eyes of ender actually land on chunk borders, so what you should do for this is you should enable chunk borders with F3 plus G, and then you should check every chunk around that with the 4-4 strategy to find the stronghold. Just know that it could be any 4 of these chunks. Next up, there's a good chance that you know about the E counter in the F3 menu. It shows the amount of entities rendered and the total amount of entities in your field of view. This is also a common speedrunning strategy used to find bastions, but I bet you didn't know about M, C, A, the other A, U, W, the other M, and T. These are individual entity counters, and I'll cover each one. The first M shows the total amount of monsters that count towards the mob cap. Mob caps are a whole different rabbit hole that I won't dive into, but I'll just say that it's the reason you have to place thousands of slabs when building some farms. C shows the total creatures, meaning passive mobs like pigs. The first A counter is for the amount of bats. Now this may raise the question, why is it abbreviated A? Well, that's because it actually tracks the total amount of ambient mobs, but there's currently only one ambient mob in the game, that being the bat. The second A counter is for counting axolotls. The U counter counts glow squids, and similarly to the A counting bats, the U actually stands for underground water creatures. The first W stands for water creatures, but only counts squids and dolphins. You might wonder why fish aren't included in this, and that's because you have to step down to the second W to get a fish count. In this case, W means water ambient mobs. Strangely, guardians and elder guardians are not counted in either of these, and they are included in the second M counter, which counts miscellaneous mobs. The T counter shows the total amount of entities in all of your loaded chunks. There's also a lot of your video settings shown in the F3 menu. The T indicator, no, not that one, but this one, shows 4 different video settings at once. It starts off with your max frame rate setting, and it shows INF if it's set to unlimited. It then shows if VSync is enabled and doesn't show it if it's off. It then shows your graphics setting, that being fast, fancy, or fabulous, and then your cloud setting, also disappearing if it's off. The B counter shows your biome blending setting. Biome blending is not to be confused with chunk blending. The biome blending option controls how colors of blocks like grass and water are blended between biomes. Chunk blending is the blending of old terrain to new terrain, like from 1.17 to 1.18. D shows your render distance, and SD shows shows your simulation distance. There are a lot of people who do not know the difference between these settings, so I'll explain it to clear up the confusion. Render distance is something that we should all know. It's the amount of chunks that are rendered in one cardinal direction. Simulation distance is sort of an entity activity distance. The following clips will have a simulation distance of 5 and a render distance of 10. These pigs are moving normally in this pen, but if I fly 5 chunks away, they completely freeze. This is because they are outside of the simulation distance. If I light this TNT and fly away, it doesn't explode, and if I go closer, it does. This setting is also capped by the render distance, meaning you can't have a higher functional simulation distance than your render distance. And to segue into the next section of the video is the debug and for help area. Let's go ahead and press F3 plus Q. Okay, let's go through. Stop. You're watching a Minecraft video. You're lazy. You don't like to read. So I'll go over the most interesting and useful features here. Let's go in alphabetical order. F3 plus A reloads all of the chunks around you. F3B shows you hitboxes of every entity around you. F3 plus C has 3 different functions. If you just press F3C, you'll copy your exact position and rotation as a teleport command. If you hold it down for 10 seconds straight, it'll force crash your game. This can be useful in a technical environment when you're trying to debug an issue with the game. But even if you knew those, I bet you didn't know about Control F3C. This forces a different kind of crash called a JVM crash or a Java crash. This is a kind of buggy feature depending on your keyboard though, and most players probably won't have much use for it, and as such I won't go into it. F3D clears your chat history from your chat. F3G shows the borders of the chunk that you're in. This can allow for many different strategies, like redstone machines that need to be in a certain chunk and more. F3H is something that I always use. It shows the item ID on everything, the exact durability on tools, exact colors, map scales, and firework crossbow data. Once you press it once, you don't need to press it again for it to always be enabled on that version. F3N cycles between spectator mode and your most recent other game mode. This is great if you're flying too slowly in creative mode and need to move quickly. F3P enables or disables pausing the game when going to another window on your computer. By default, your game will pause if you tab out of the game, but this can be enabled or disabled with F3P. As I mentioned before, F3Q shows the list of these key combinations. F3T reloads all resource pack contents like textures and sounds. This is useful if you're adding things to a resource pack frequently and you need to see the changes quickly. And if F3N wasn't enough game mode switching for you, F3 plus F4 is a full-on game mode switcher. F3 plus Escape pauses the game in an interesting way. If you're playing in single player, this pauses the game without the pause menu. This is good if you want to pause but still easily be able to see around. Now let's discuss Alt plus F3 and Shift plus F3. Nah, I'm just kidding. Alt F3 isn't interesting enough for your awful attention span, so let's talk about this thing. Pressing Shift plus F3 opens up the F3 menu, but with this pie chart at the bottom. This has a lot of features in it, but I'll only cover how to navigate it and a couple of uses for it. But bear in mind that it is much more complicated than I'm making it sound. To go into one of these, press the associated number next to it. Just like you would do to switch to a hotbar slot, this chart is controlled with the numbers 0 through 9. To go up a level, that meaning back 1, press the 0 key. There's a bunch of annoying bugs with this pie chart though. For one, if you go deep enough in, you'll find a ton of entries that are completely inaccessible because the numbers associated are above 9. Not only that, but it doesn't scale with your GUI scale, so it can be really small on some monitors. But this pie chart actually has some pretty smart uses. For one, you can use it to find strongholds, villages, nether fortresses, and more. In Minecraft 1.19.3, you can navigate to tick, level, and block entities. This will list a couple of blocks like chests and mob spawners. If you're near certain structures, it shows more. In the video that I'll link below, you can use a strategy known as PyRay to find structures using only this chart, and I'm sure some technical players watching this can probably find some other cool uses for it. Like if you go to entities instead of block entities, you can see a list of entities in your loaded chunks, but I'll leave the pie chart at that. The F3 menu has had some interesting history. From beta 1.8 to release 1.2.5, you could actually see the world seed in this menu. In 1.2.1, the ability to see the seed on multiplayer servers was removed and it would always show as 0. In 1.3.1, the entire feature was migrated to the /seed command. The boxes in the F3 menu behind the text were only added in 1.8, so old Minecraft players may only be used to this. But for the 1.8.9 players, there are some mods, usually called old animation mods, that remove the boxes. If your F3 menu isn't showing a lot of information, make sure that the reduce debug info option is disabled in your chat settings. If it still isn't working, make sure that the reduce debug info game rule is set to false. Some, but not many servers have this on, and as such, you can't turn it off while you're playing on them. There's 2 removed F3 combinations that people tend to use when playing on old versions. The first is F3 plus S. This can be exploited by PvPers who use it to freeze themselves in time to gain a competitive advantage. But this is not an endorsement of that. What it actually does is a little bit weird. F3T used to not reload the sounds of the game. It used to only reload textures. So F3S reloaded sounds and F3T reloaded textures. Eventually they were both merged into F3T, so you aren't missing out on anything with the removal of F3S. F3F used to exist until 1.19 and it was a keybind to change your render distance. F3F increased it, and holding shift while pressing F3F would decrease it. It's used by speedrunners to save time by not navigating to the video settings menu to change the setting, but some players also used it all of the time. I honestly have no idea why it was removed, and I can't seem to find any reason for it. Before 1.15, the F3 menu used to show a little counter in the top called chunk updates. You've probably noticed it before, but you probably never realized that it was ever removed, especially if you use Optifine, because it was never removed in the mod and it still appears in all modern versions of the game. And on that note, I hope you now know more than you'll ever need to know about the F3 menu.